Then we can put it on our bottle. I'm gonna have to go get my bottle because, you know, sometimes it's nice to have help. And what they do is they stand around, oh, hi.
Why'd you take his bottle, Sam?
Sam's Garage, presented by Hemsaw. On this episode of Sam's Garage, Sam and Kevin crank up the 68 Chevelle for the first time. Sam and Doug continue working at Hemsaw headquarters on the new frame for the 57 Thunderbird. Sam installs a new set of interior door panels for the C10 Chevy truck. And Sam's 87 Buick T-Type gets a new upgraded performance torque converter. Sam and Kevin wrap up the Holley EFI system in the 68 Chevelle by installing the computer. Kevin made a custom bracket to mount the computer inside the fender for easy access. Be sure to stick around to the end and watch them fire up the engine for the first time.
This bracket you made is absolutely beautiful. Holds that Terminator X perfectly on there.
I appreciate it. Travis made a pattern for me, so I was able to locate the holes and everything.
And you painted it, looks very nice. As you can see, we got the Terminator X on this bracket. It's gonna go inside the inner fender after we mark the holes, measure and drill. But before we fully mount it in place, we're gonna make sure that none of the lights on the Holley EFI are illuminated other than green or blue. If you have a red, like a TPS or a crank and cam sensor, you have no sync, you're gonna see it right here. You can go to the Holley instruction book, find out exactly where to go in the system to find out what the problem is, fix it, then it'll run.
We're not gonna have any problems.
Yeah, that's what you say. You just jinx us.
So we're gonna hide this inside this fender. I know it's not convenient, but we wanted to give it that polished look like we weren't able to do on the Buick.
And as you can see, in our case, we're running NA, no boost, no nitrous, none of that. So we're gonna use the internal map sensor inside the computer, so it gives us good reliability and drivability.
And just in case anybody's wondering, this has the transmission controller in it. That's how we send out all these crate motors, because we don't know what transmission they're gonna use.
And you supply them with a transmission harness?
Yes.
That's pretty cool. The map sensor right here for the Holley, the blue is a little flimsy. So when you're putting it in position, make sure you don't kink this. Make sure you got a good path going in. If the map sensor gets kinked, it's gonna think it's rich, and it'll be in full enrichment mode every time, because there is no vacuum. When you guys are priming your fuel system for the first time, the Holley's gonna run for about 3 to 5 seconds. That's not enough to completely fill your system. So cycle the key one more time. You can actually hear the sound of the pump change, and then when you hear that resistance on it, you know the system is pretty much full. The oil drain is pretty dirty in there, and we all use funnels, and we don't clean them until we go to use them again. It's very important to clean them. Here, you wipe the outside, wipe the inside, let the brake cleaner dry, so that nothing gets into the component you're putting the fluid into. And if you use a good brake cleaner, it's alcohol-based, it's gonna dry pretty fast. So I've done so many engine swaps over the years on just performance cars and your daily, everyday cars. And when you have a problem, you have coolant in the system, you gotta take the engine back out. There's nothing worse than draining out the coolant and putting it back in. It makes a huge mess. So to save the time, put a pressure tester on the cooling system. Now there is no fluid in there. You're gonna have to pump it really hard to get a lot of air in there to get it to pressurize. I've got 10 PSI holding for at least 5 to 10 minutes. As long as it's holding, I know that I can now introduce water or coolant into the system and I'm not gonna have a bad day. Holley system is so awesome that usually if it doesn't crank up on you, it's the end user. Either you're gonna have a crank cam sync issue, or if you're running a fly-by-wire, you're gonna have a harness issue. I've done it to both of my projects outside, the Cadillac and the Turbo Buick, And Kevin just did it to his own car. And usually if you're gonna mess up, you're gonna do it to your own car.
And the car kind of speaks to you. As Travis pointed out, the throttle body kept opening and closing when we were keying on.
Yep. And there's red lights like we discussed, diagnostic lights that you go into the manual, troubleshoot it, see what you need to do, go to that system and fix it.
Yeah.
Okay, so are we gonna fire it up?
Let's do it. Can I turn the key?
Yes, sir, do it. Another thing, if you're working on a lift, get the car off the ground, get the wheels off, or please double check and make sure you're in neutral if you have a manual car. That's nice.
Sounds great. Those mufflers sound good.
Sam's Garage, presented by Hemsaw. Sam and Doug continue working on the new frame for the 57 Ford Thunderbird. Building the new frame is precision work, and it's important that everything is straight. The guys show us some of the tools they'll be using to ensure that the frame is straight and true.
Today we're going to be taking the frame and actually putting it together, tacking it together, putting the front end on, putting the rear end on, and seeing what this is going to start to look like actually coming to fruition.
Yeah, Sam, I think the guys are just doing a tremendous job. The layout, the cutting, everything that we did yesterday. You can really see in the build how it's all starting to come together. I mean, Joe and Ron doing a fantastic job.
They really are. Making sure that everything is level is very important, and what Ron and Joe are doing right now is leveling the actual front end, raising it up just a little bit to make sure it's level before we continue on with welding anything. All right, so we had this beam was just a little bit lower than that side, and to make it level, we're using big metal shims underneath the I-beam because we want the frame rail to be on the same plane. So this side needs to come up a little bit more. So we added some shims, wide, flat ones that are able to support all this weight.
One item that becomes absolutely critical when you're doing this, you got to make sure that your level is level. And the way that you do that is take a look at where your bubble is and then spin it 180. And if you spin it 180 and the bubble returns to the exact same position, you know your level is level. If it is not, this level here has adjustments so I can make sure it reads exactly the same in both directions, then I know it's set properly. That's one of the critical items, because if you trust your level and it's not right and you think it's level, then everything's going to be askew. This table is set up so we can go ahead and adjust the table. We can adjust each one of the corners, so we can adjust it this way and this way. And this way we can make sure it's level in the X and the Y axis.
We're right now building the part of the frame that goes over the rear axle and supports the trunk area. So it goes from the front over here. This is where the rear axle is going to be. This is the trunk, and then we're going to go back to the rear bumper.
For some of you guys at home, we talked about the frame being straight, so there's some changes we're going to be making in the car. One of the changes is we're going to be taking the spare tire well out of the trunk. That's going to allow the frame to be straight. We're also going to look at how we're going to reposition the gas tank. By doing those things, it makes building the frame easier, and since we're going to a 4-link onto it, also with a Panhard rod to hold everything in place to allow the car to handle better, we're needing to make a few changes that have been done on the frame and also on the body of the car.
Very good description. If you guys don't know what a Panhard bar is, it's basically a Panhard bar.
Yeah.
It's there to center this rear end, make sure it doesn't go left or right.
You're right.
It's hard to imagine that all those pieces on the pallet last week turned into a frame like this. You're probably wondering why we put this thing on wheels, because we narrowed the frame. We want to make sure that it fits underneath the body before we continue on welding everything together, right?
That's absolutely correct. It's a dry fit while it's tacked together, just to be sure.
And it was an awful lot of work, but you could really see how it's really starting to look good. I think it's going to fit great.
Next week, we're gonna be fitting it under the car, and we're gonna continue on building the chassis, and then we're gonna do the front and rear end, so stay tuned, guys. If you guys remember, I just did a cylinder head job on this, and when I changed the oil, there was no contamination with coolant because I drained the block first. It's a very good tip. Now, one thing that hasn't changed over the years with cars being around is your oil change intervals. If you're running conventional oil, you want to do it every 3,000 miles. If you're running synthetic oil, you want to do it every 5,000 miles. Now, in the last 3 decades, engines have been using the oil as hydraulic fluid as well to activate and deactivate the variable valve timing system. That puts a real strain on the oil. Not only that, but the contaminants within the crankcase gets built up in the oil, and you want to get that out. If you guys change your oil every 3,000 to 5,000 miles, your maintenance costs would dramatically be lower. You wouldn't probably have any engine failure as well. Now, some of them do fail, but most of them will not, as long as you change the oil.
Now back to more Sam's Garage.
Sam installs a new set of door panels from Brothers Truck Parts for the C10 interior refresh project. The new replacement door panels are designed to fit just like the factory ones. Brothers also provides options for different trim colors and window regulator types.
All right, so continuing with our Project C10, I've got the dashboard and new instrument cluster in place. I'm gonna go with my new door panels now. I got nice new black door panels, and the original has wooden trim up top. I'm gonna go with this nice aluminum trim to match the new trim on the dash. Now, those are gonna get bolted in with those studs and speed nuts on the door panel itself. On the back of the panel, there's going to be little indentions where you can see where those holes are going to be drilled. And you want to double check and make sure you measure these just to make sure those holes are correct. And if they're not, it's okay, because that's going to cover whatever holes you've mistakenly put in place. So first, I'm going to put both my aluminum pieces on my panels, remove the old ones, and go in with the new ones. Before you continue, you drop that clip, you stop, locate it, put it away, then continue working. If not, you'll be looking for it for about 2 days. That guy wasn't even bolted in. There's supposed to be 4 screws on the bottom, there were none there. So really it was just slid into place, and the only thing holding it in place was the one screw right there in the middle. Now, I'm not gonna go back with this strap or that wooden trim. The new panel is gonna have the aluminum trim that's gonna match the dashboard. So we're gonna put on our pad, okay? That screws into place from the bottom, right? And this is left hand, just in case you guys are wondering. It does have a mark on the inside of the panel that says left hand, meaning driver's side, if you're in America. So after doing some measurements, I found out that this lines up with the outside studs. The second stud, there's 2 holes, so the outside one lines up with my stud. Unfortunately, this one is roughly 1 inch off. So just to make sure, because I know the 2 outside ones line up, I'm going to take some white paint, so now I can very confidently drill my holes. All right, so when you guys are putting your armrest on, there's 1 stud and 2 empty holes. These 2 empty holes are going to go inside the bracket that's on the door itself. That way when you pull the door panel, you're actually pulling solid metal. So when you put on your 1 stud, you see I've doubled up washers. Make sure that you're lined up. Then these 2 push clips are going to go in here. So that hole there is going to be for my hand crank. The reason why they don't drill the hole for you is because the same door panel is going to work on a manual door regulator or a electronic window regulator, that square being where you would normally put the switches for the windows. But because we're using a hand crank, the circle's there. Double check and make sure the circle's in the correct spot before you make your hole. I did, we're good. Man, that looks so good. Brothers really knocked it out the park. It's so nice when you get aftermarket parts and it fits as well as these do. You know you've done a good job when the door panel aluminum trim lines up perfectly with the dash aluminum trim when you close the door. So that is really nice. Either brothers did a really good job on the parts, which they always do, or the truck's never been wrecked. I think it's the first one. Now, when you guys get your door panels, it's gonna be brand new and you've spent a lot of money on them. Make sure that before you put the crank on the new door panel, Brothers does sell these plastic retainers that goes behind it, basically a washer. And that's gonna keep those scratches from occurring on your new door panel. So we're gonna continue with our theme on the interior. So next we're gonna be moving on to the carpet and the headliner. After that, we're gonna reupholster the seat and put a period on the interior.
Nora and Nelson from ACC Performance stopped by Sam's garage to help upgrade the torque converter in his '87 Buick T-Type. Boss Hog torque converters are lighter and stronger than the factory unit, ensuring the power from the engine is reliably transferred to the transmission.
I got this Buick in the shop for the final time. I've only had it for 30 years. Actually, it's been 20. So it's got an 83 millimeter turbo, a built 6-liter. It's gonna make a whole bunch of horsepower. I have a 4L80 in it. It's gonna handle the horsepower, but the torque converter is gonna burn up. So I want peace of mind, and I wanna know that the horsepower is gonna be put to the ground properly. And who else to go to than Nora and Nelson at ACC Performance, and I got one of their Boss Hog torque converters, so that it's gonna complement this Buick and it can finally go home.
It's all in matching the stall to the application, and that's something that we do best. You need to come to us and let us go through your entire setup. If they're not asking all the questions, they're shortchanging you on your performance and also the value of what you are buying.
That is so true. You do ask every question that you know is going to affect the variable of that stall, the weight of the car, the cam, the rear end gear, all that stuff, how much horsepower you're going to make, when the power is going to come in. And then when you get into that Cadillac, it's just smooth as can be. The shifts are firm and smooth. You don't feel anything, even though the line pressure is high. It's really cool.
What happens when you wrap your foot on it?
Yeah, it goes. It goes like you wouldn't believe,
And
no
that's
problem.
what matters.
That's what matters, and the fact that you're not boiling the fluid in the transmission. Everything is staying proper. The temperatures are at bay, and you're not going to cook the transmission.
My world-class engineers, everybody that works for me is just such good people, and the attention to detail is off the chain on what we're doing on every single step of the way.
Yeah, that's what makes a good product at the end, you know? And then customer service also matters, and they're absolutely known for it.
This is a top.
Okay, what's the next piece, Nora?
This is a bearing.
Okay, and that is a Torrington style bearing. We only use Torrington style bearings all throughout our entire process because they're tougher, stronger, and will hold a lot more abuse. The stator actually locks up, or it stops, so it actually has a one-way sprag in it. Now you can remove that one-way sprag, okay, so it's allowed to go one way, or this way it won't. So once it stops, once there's enough fluid pressure hitting this, it actually applies back pressure to the turbine, so there's still fluid coming in from the outside, and as the back pressure is pushed against these fins, it begins to drive the car at that point. That's where you get your stall range from.
Okay, so now what we're gonna do is we're gonna pull the transmission out of the car. We're gonna take that old rusty OEM torque converter out that's this big, and we're gonna put one of your compact, nice, high performance torque converters in. You ready? Let's get our hands dirty.
All right.
All right, so I've already drained the oil out of my 4L80. Luckily, I have a drain plug. Went ahead and lowered the fluid level in the pan so that when I take off my Lokar dipstick, I'm not gonna have any fluid coming out of this hole. That's gonna make a huge mess. All I gotta do now is bring the transmission down, disconnect my cooler lines because the car is in the way. I'm gonna cap them off so I don't make a mess, and then we're gonna go ahead and tack that torque converter, take it out, and put yours in. Tie these two together, that keeps a mess. I plug the transmission itself, that keeps a mess. Now this is new, so it's not completely full, but if this was a full OEM car that drove into the shop, there's gonna be fluid pouring out of every orifice. So I just try to keep it a little bit cleaner. So now that we got our transmission out, we're gonna take out the old OEM huge heavy torque converter. You said this alone will give us 50 horsepower, right? Just from the weight difference.
To the ground.
Yeah, that's crazy. That's a lot. Like we need any more in this application, right? All right, so next week we're gonna come back, we're gonna install our ACC Boss Hog torque converter, put the transmission back in, fire this thing up, and hopefully send it home to Michael.